The African sun blazed across the golden savannah, casting long shadows over the dry grasslands of Kruger National Park, South Africa. It was a land of untamed wilderness, where the balance of life and death played out every single day. Herds of antelope grazed cautiously by a shimmering lake, their ears twitching at every sound, always alert for the dangers lurking in the high grass. And among them, one predator ruled above all, a lion, the king of the savannah. This lion was no ordinary beast. He was a legend, a creature of unmatched power and unquestioned dominance. His majestic golden mane, thick and full, rippled in the wind as he prowled through his vast territory. His eyes, sharp and calculating, watched over the land with the confidence of a ruler who had never been challenged. Tourists from around the world came just for a glimpse of him, whispering in awe as their cameras clicked from the safety of their jeeps. Park rangers admired his strength, respecting the delicate balance he maintained in the ecosystem. He had no rivals, no true enemies. It was mid-afternoon, and the air shimmered with heat. The lion crouched low, his muscles coiled like springs, his piercing gaze locked onto his prey. A large antelope with a wounded leg, slightly slower than the rest of the herd. The predator had made his choice. With a sudden explosion of raw power, he charged forward. The herd scattered in a desperate frenzy, hooves kicking up clouds of dust. The chosen antelope, panicked and limping, sprinted toward the lake, the only escape. Others followed, leaping into the water in blind fear. But the lion was relentless, his massive paws pounding the earth as he closed the distance. Then, in a moment of pure desperation, the antelope jumped into the lake. The lion, caught in the thrill of the chase, didn't hesitate. He lunged right after it, muscles straining as his powerful body sliced through the surface of the water. But this time, something went wrong. The lion had hunted dozens of times before. He had crossed rivers, ambushed prey near watering holes, even taken down crocodiles who dared challenge him. But this lake was different. Beneath the seemingly calm waters, a powerful underwater current twisted and pulled beneath the surface. The moment the lion plunged in, he realized his mistake. The water was deeper than he had anticipated. The strong undercurrent dragged him down, his massive paws scrambling against the force. His powerful body, built for land and dominance, was no match for the relentless pull of the deep. He thrashed and roared, but the water swallowed his cries. Above the surface, the antelope, a far better swimmer, managed to paddle its way to the shallows, escaping certain death. But the lion, he was sinking. The predator that once ruled the land was now at the mercy of nature's cruelty. His golden mane, once a symbol of his might, spread out in the water, floating like a crown on the surface as his body disappeared beneath the waves. And just as his majestic form sank beneath the surface, lost to the depths of the lake, a man saw everything. Cesar, a veteran ranger, was driving along a dusty road on his usual patrol, scanning the landscape with his keen eyes. Years of working in Kruger had given him an almost sixth sense for when something was wrong. And that day, something felt off. A disturbance near the lake, the herd of antelope in distress. A sudden burst of motion. Then, nothing. Cesar slowed his vehicle, frowning. He knew the ways of the wild. A hunt should end with either a feast or an escape, but something was missing. His eyes locked onto the rippling surface of the water. And then, through the waves, a glimpse of golden fur, his breath caught in his throat. A lion was drowning. No time to think, no time to hesitate. Without a second thought, Cesar slammed his foot on the brakes, throwing the vehicle into park. His heart pounded as he ripped off his jacket, sprinting toward the water. He knew the risks. This was madness. Saving a fully grown male lion, even an unconscious one, was suicidal. But something deep inside him refused to let this magnificent creature die. Cesar took a deep breath and jumped into the unknown. The shock of the cold water hit Cesar like a punch to the chest. The weight of his uniform dragged at his limbs as he forced himself deeper, the murky lake swallowing him whole. The world above faded into a blur of distorted sunlight and shifting shadows as he dove into the abyss. His lungs burned, his muscles strained against the resistance of the current. But he pushed forward, eyes darting through the water. Then, there, a flicker of movement. A massive shape suspended in the depths, sinking further with every passing second. The lion. Cesar kicked hard, propelling himself downward, reaching out with desperate fingers. He grabbed hold of the beast's thick, waterlogged mane, feeling the immense weight dragging him down. The lion's body was limp, its mighty chest still, its powerful legs unresponsive. It wasn't breathing. Adrenaline surged through Cesar's veins. He wasn't going to let it end like this. Gritting his teeth, he wrapped his arms around the lion's torso, using every ounce of strength he had to pull it upward. His legs burned as he kicked, fighting against the weight, against the water that refused to release its grip. The lion's body was heavy, so much heavier than he expected. Every second counted. The surface felt impossibly far away. His vision blurred, his lungs screamed for air, but he refused to let go. Inch by inch, he dragged the lifeless predator toward salvation, his grip tightening with sheer determination. Then, at last, he broke through. Gasping, Cesar burst into the open air, his arms still locked around the lion's massive form. The weight threatened to pull him back under, but he fought against it, kicking furiously to stay afloat. He could hear the frantic sounds of the savannah, the distant calls of birds, the rustling of grass, and somewhere the panicked snorts of the antelope who had narrowly escaped their own fate. But none of it mattered. Not yet. He had to get the lion to shore. With one final burst of effort, Cesar dragged the beast toward the muddy bank. His arms trembled, his chest heaved, but finally, he reached solid ground. With a grunt of exhaustion, he collapsed onto his knees, his hands still gripping the lion's thick fur. The animal lay motionless, its golden mane darkened with water, its powerful body unnervingly still. No movement, no sound. A sickening dread coiled in Cesar's stomach. Was he too late? His pulse roared in his ears as he pressed a hand to the lion's ribcage. No rise, no fall. The lion wasn't breathing. Cesar's mind raced. He had been trained in wildlife first aid, had learned how to assist injured animals. But this? He had never performed CPR on a lion before. But there was no time for doubt. Positioning himself next to the animal, he placed his hands over its chest, pressing down in steady, firm compressions. The sheer size of the beast made it difficult, but he adjusted his weight, using his full strength to keep the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, nothing. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to keep going. 4, 5, 6, still nothing. He exhaled sharply, shifting his stance. This was insane, but there was no other choice. Carefully, he tilted the lion's head back, making sure its airway was clear. Then, with measured precision, he took a deep breath and pressed his lips against the lion's nose, forcing air into its lungs. A single second passed. 2, 3. Then, a twitch. Cesar barely had time to react before the lion's entire body convulsed. A ragged, choking breath tore from its throat, followed by a violent cough. Water sprayed from its mouth as its massive chest heaved. Its eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, golden irises locking onto him. Cesar froze. For a long, breathless moment, predator and man stared at each other. The lion's nostrils flared, its muscles trembled as it slowly regained control of its body. Its claws flexed instinctively against the wet earth. Cesar remained completely still. This was the most dangerous moment. A panicked, confused lion was just as deadly as a hungry one. His heart pounded, but he didn't move, didn't even breathe, watching as the lion's gaze flicked between him and the vast savannah beyond. Then, to his utter shock, the lion didn't attack. Instead, it blinked slowly, its breath still heavy, its body weak but no longer tense with fear. Cesar exhaled, carefully shifting back. The lion's tail flicked, its ears twitched, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, it lowered its massive head, pressing its chin against the damp earth. Relief flooded Cesar's body. It was alive, and against all odds, it wasn't going to hurt him. He watched as the lion's chest continued to rise and fall, its breathing still labored but steady. The ruler of the savannah had been given a second chance, and he had been the one to make it happen. Cesar sat back on his heels, his breath still ragged, watching as the lion lay sprawled on the muddy bank, its massive body shuddering with every exhausted breath. The golden mane, once proud and untamed, clung to its skin in heavy, wet clumps, but its eyes, those piercing, sunlit eyes, had lost none of their fire. For a moment neither of them moved. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and adrenaline, the distant sounds of the savannah muted beneath the steady rhythm of Cesar's pounding heart. Then the lion stirred. Its ears twitched, testing the world around it, before its powerful shoulders tensed, muscles coiling beneath drenched fur. It was trying to rise. Cesar instinctively leaned forward, his hands hovering just above the lion's frame, unsure whether to help or to brace himself for what might happen next. The lion exhaled, a deep, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Slowly, shakily, it pressed its front paws into the ground, claws digging into the mud for purchase. Its back legs trembled under the weight of its own body. Then, with a slow, determined movement, it lifted itself upright. Cesar felt his breath hitch. The lion was standing. Unsteady, weakened, but standing. For the first time since pulling the beast from the water, Cesar allowed himself to believe, really believe, that the impossible had happened. He had saved a lion. But it wasn't over yet. The predator swayed slightly, shaking droplets from its mane, blinking against the golden rays of the setting sun. Its body still bore the weight of exhaustion, its limbs sluggish and uncoordinated. It wouldn't survive out here alone in this state. Cesar knew he had to get help. Slowly, carefully, he reached for his radio, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The lion's ears perked at the faint static crackling through the speaker, but it didn't react beyond that. "This is Cesar. I need immediate assistance near the western lake," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I have a lion, yes, a live lion, that nearly drowned. It's conscious but weak. I need a transport team, over." Silence. Then a voice crackled back through the receiver. "Cesar, did you say a lion?" He exhaled. "Yeah, and it's standing right in front of me." A pause. Then, "Copy that. We're on our way." Cesar lowered the radio, turning his attention back to the lion. It had begun to take slow, deliberate steps, testing its balance. Each movement was sluggish, its muscles stiff from exhaustion, but there was something else in its posture now, an undeniable resilience. The king of the savannah refused to fall. Caesar stood, keeping a respectful distance as the lion shook its head, droplets flying from its drenched fur. The beast blinked at him, its golden gaze unwavering. And then something happened that sent a shiver down Caesar's spine. The lion took a step forward, not toward the open plains, not toward escape, but toward him. Caesar's breath caught. Instinct told him to back away, to give the animal space. But something deeper, something unspoken, held him still. The lion's massive head tilted slightly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air between them. It was close now, so close that Caesar could see the fine scars etched into its muzzle, the years of battle and survival woven into its flesh. And then, without warning, the lion did something that no wild predator should ever do. It lowered its head. Not in submission, not in defeat, but in recognition. A silent understanding passed between them, something ancient and unspoken. Caesar had saved its life, and the lion knew it. The moment lasted only a few heartbeats before the animal pulled back, shaking off whatever lingering traces of weakness still clung to it. It turned slightly, casting one last glance at the man who had pulled it from death. Then, with a deep, powerful breath, it let out a sound. Not a full roar, not a snarl, but something softer. A low, vibrating rumble that sent shivers down Caesar's spine. And just like that, the lion took a slow step backward, its body still unsteady, but its spirit unbroken. The sound of approaching engines echoed in the distance, the transport team finally arriving. But Caesar barely registered it. All he could think about was the way the lion had looked at him. Not as prey, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. The transport team arrived in a cloud of dust, their heavy vehicles rumbling to a stop a few meters away. The moment the first ranger stepped out, the lion's ears flicked, its body tensing as it instinctively assessed the new arrivals. It wasn't fully recovered, but even in its weakened state, the presence of multiple humans was enough to make the great beast wary. Caesar raised a hand, signaling the rangers to move carefully. "Stay back. He's aware but still weak," he called, keeping his tone measured. The last thing they needed was to startle the lion into a panic. One of the rangers, a tall man named Elias, approached cautiously, his eyes darting between Caesar and the lion. "I can't believe you pulled him out," Elias muttered, adjusting the tranquilizer rifle slung over his shoulder. "You're lucky you're still in one piece." Caesar exhaled, never taking his eyes off the lion. "I don't think luck had much to do with it." Elias studied the animal for a moment, then motioned to the others. "We'll have to sedate him before transport. He might be calm now, but once the adrenaline fades, he could turn." Caesar hesitated. The idea of tranquilizing the lion, after everything, felt wrong, but he knew they had no choice. If the lion panicked inside the vehicle, it could injure itself or worse. Still, something inside him resisted. "Give me a second," Caesar said, stepping forward just enough to catch the lion's attention. The great beast turned its gaze toward him, its golden eyes locking onto his once more. For a moment, Caesar forgot about the rangers, the trucks, the world around them. It was just him and the lion. "You have to trust me one more time," Caesar murmured, his voice steady but soft. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small piece of dried meat, the same kind he always carried for emergencies. He tore off a strip, then crouched down, extending it in his palm. The rangers behind him murmured in disbelief. The lion's nostrils flared. It hesitated, then took a step closer. Another. Caesar remained still, heart pounding, as the lion leaned in. It sniffed the offering, eyes flicking between the food and the man holding it. Then, in a slow, deliberate movement, the lion extended its tongue, taking the piece from Caesar's hand with the utmost care. A breath Caesar hadn't realized he was holding escaped him. He met the lion's gaze once more. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe." The lion exhaled heavily. Then, as if in agreement, it lowered itself onto its haunches, no longer trying to fight exhaustion. Caesar stood and turned to Elias. "Do it now." Elias nodded and raised the tranquilizer rifle. A quiet pop cut through the air as the dart found its mark. The lion barely reacted, only flicking its tail before its muscles relaxed further. Within moments, its heavy head lowered, its body giving in to the forced sleep. The team moved quickly, securing the lion for transport. Caesar watched, hands clenched at his sides, feeling an unshakable protectiveness over the animal he had just saved. As the lion was carefully lifted onto the transport vehicle, Elias clapped Caesar on the shoulder. "I've seen a lot of things in my time here," he said, shaking his head, "but I've never seen a lion trust a man like that." Caesar glanced at the massive creature now resting in the truck bed. "Neither have I." They climbed into their vehicles, and as the convoy rumbled toward the protected reserve, Caesar kept his gaze on the lion. Even in sleep, the animal radiated a quiet power, a reminder of just how close it had come to losing everything. But not today. And as they drove into the heart of the savannah, Caesar had a strange feeling that this was far from the end of their story. The convoy moved slowly through the winding dirt paths of Kruger National Park, dust swirling behind them as the golden sun dipped closer to the horizon. The lion remained motionless in the back of the truck, its deep, steady breathing the only sign that it was still with them. Caesar rode in the passenger seat, his fingers tapping absently against his knee, his eyes flicking back to the animal every few minutes. Elias, focused on the road ahead, finally broke the silence. "You think he'll remember any of this?" he asked, nodding toward the truck bed. Caesar hesitated before answering. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like to think so." They reached the designated release site just as the last light of day stretched long across the landscape. It was a vast, open plain, flanked by clusters of acacia trees and a winding river cutting through the terrain. A safe distance from human settlements, yet rich in prey and shelter. An ideal place for the lion to recover and reclaim his dominance. The team worked quickly to lower the transport gate, ensuring everything was set for the lion's safe awakening. The tranquilizer's effects would soon wear off, and they needed to be prepared. Caesar stood close, watching as the great beast's muscles began to twitch, his tail flicking slightly before his powerful shoulders rose and fell with deep, awakening breaths. The others kept their distance, their hands hovering near their weapons, just in case. The lion's eyelids fluttered. Then, with a slow, deliberate exhale, his golden eyes opened. For a long moment he didn't move. He simply lay there, taking in his surroundings, the familiar sense of the wild wrapping around him like an old memory. His gaze eventually shifted to the men standing nearby, lingering for just a second longer on Caesar. Caesar didn't speak, didn't move. He just held the lion's gaze, waiting. Then, with a mighty groan, the lion pushed himself up onto his front paws. His legs wobbled, but he steadied himself, shaking off the remnants of the tranquilizer. The muscles beneath his golden coat rippled as he took a tentative step forward, then another. His head lifted higher, his chest expanding as he drew in the crisp, untamed air of the savannah. And then he roared. The sound tore through the air, vibrating deep in Caesar's bones. It was not just any roar. It was a declaration, a reminder to the world that the ruler had returned. The other rangers exchanged wary glances, but Caesar only smiled. The lion took a few more steps forward before pausing again. He turned his head slightly, his piercing gaze meeting Caesar's one last time. There was something in those eyes, something Caesar couldn't quite explain. Gratitude, recognition, whatever it was real. Then, without another moment's hesitation, the lion turned toward the vast expanse before him and strode forward, each step stronger than the last. The golden hues of his mane shimmered in the fading sunlight, his powerful frame disappearing into the wild where he belonged. Silence fell over the group as they watched him go. Elias let out a low whistle. That, he murmured, shaking his head, was something else. Caesar exhaled slowly, his chest still tight with the weight of the moment. Yeah, he agreed, it really was. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Caesar took one last look at the place where the lion had vanished. Some part of him knew, deep down, that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Because sometimes, in the vast wilderness, bonds were formed that even nature itself couldn't break. And somewhere out there, beneath the African sky, a lion was walking free. Not just because he had been saved, but because he had chosen to live. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every life deserves a second chance, and every act of kindness can change the world. Stay with us for more incredible stories that prove the power of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and the wild.